In 1492, the European servers got a massive content update that unlocked an entire new continent. Players who'd been grinding the same trade routes for centuries suddenly had access to unexplored zones, legendary loot, and unmoderated PvP. What followed was the most broken expansion in gaming history. This is the age of exploration as an MMO. Before the update, European players were stuck doing low-level, repetitive quests. Farm wheat, pay guild fees to the church, occasionally fight other players over territory nobody wanted. The endgame content, spices, silk, porcelain from Asia, was all controlled by one faction. The Ottoman Empire had captured the main trade route checkpoint in 1453, and now gatekept all Asian imports. You wanted spices? You paid Ottoman prices. No alternatives. European kingdoms started looking for exploits. Portugal discovered you could sail around Africa to bypass the Ottoman checkpoint entirely. In 1488, they rounded the Cape and reached the Indian Ocean. Achievement unlocked. Alternative route to endgame content. Spain watched Portugal's success and wanted their own route. Enter Christopher Columbus, a player who'd been posting on the forums for years with a strategy that everyone said wouldn't work. He claimed you could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. His math was catastrophically wrong. He thought the Earth was way smaller than it actually was. Spain funded him anyway. Worst case scenario, he dies at sea. Best case, they find a new route. Here's what nobody on the European servers knew. There was already another continent between Europe and Asia, and it wasn't empty. The Americas had been populated for over 15,000 years by millions of players across hundreds of civilizations: Aztec Empire, Inca Empire, Maya city-states, and countless others. Different server, different tech trees, completely independent development. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean in 1492, it was like two MMOs merging. One side had steel weapons, gunpowder, horses, and ocean-going ships. The other side had been developing their own tech trees and didn't have any of those things. But they'd built massive cities, complex trade networks, and advanced agricultural systems. Columbus thought he'd reached India. He called the indigenous players Indians because he completely misread the map. He died still believing he'd found Asia. He hadn't discovered anything. He stumbled onto a different server by accident while being wrong about everything. Spain saw potential. Columbus found gold. They started sending more expeditions. Portugal protested, so the Pope literally drew a line on the world map and said, Spain gets everything west, Portugal gets everything east. Server admins just randomly divided territory without asking anyone who already lived there.
For 20 years, Spain and Portugal set up trading posts and small settlements. Then Hernan Cortez logged in and decided to solo a raid boss. The Aztec Empire, millions of players, capital city of 200,000 people, bigger than any European city at the time. Cortez showed up with 600 soldiers. This should have been mathematically impossible. But Cortez discovered the game had broken mechanics. Exploit number 1, disease was bugged. European players had passive immunity to smallpox and measles from centuries of exposure. American server players had zero resistance because these diseases didn't exist on their continent. When the servers merged, Europeans accidentally brought biological weapons that spread faster than any army. Some regions saw 90% mortality rates within decades. It was a one-sided status effect that only European players were immune to. Exploit number 2, faction recruitment. The Aztecs had spent years PKing neighboring civilizations for tribute. Those factions hated them and were looking for allies. Cortez showed up and said, "Want to team up?" The Tlaxcalans joined with thousands of warriors. His small force became a massive coalition army. Europeans brought steel and guns. Indigenous allies brought numbers and local knowledge. In 1521, after a brutal siege, the Aztec capital fell. Spain got the biggest loot haul in server history, tons of gold and silver. Spain looked at this and thought, if it works once, run it back. Francisco Pizarro used the exact same exploit chain on the Inca Empire. Join during faction civil war, recruit local enemies, let disease do half the work, collect gold. By the 1540s, Spain controlled most of Central and South America and forced indigenous populations into mining silver. The Potosí silver mine in Bolivia alone produced thousands of tons of silver. Spain was farming legendary items on an industrial scale. Then they made a catastrophic economic mistake.
They flooded their own marketplace. When you dump massive amounts of a rare resource into circulation, it loses value. Spain experienced severe inflation. Prices quadrupled over the 1500s. They got all the gold and still went broke. It's like farming a legendary drop so hard it becomes vendor trash. Meanwhile, Portugal played completely differently. No military conquest speedruns. They set up trading posts along African and Asian coasts, negotiated with local powers, and controlled merchant routes. Less flashy than Spain's raids, but economically sustainable. England, France, and the Netherlands watched Spain and Portugal dividing the map and decided they wanted in. Problem: the best zones were already claimed. England showed up late but played the long game. They focused on North America, which Spain ignored because it lacked obvious gold deposits. Instead of quick loot runs, England built colonies designed for resource generation: tobacco, cotton, timber, passive income over time versus one-time dungeon clears. France went for the Canadian fur trade, establishing commerce partnerships with indigenous groups. The Netherlands became merchant middlemen. If they couldn't control territory, they'd control the trade networks. By the 1600s, the Caribbean became an open PvP zone. Multiple European factions competing for the same islands, constant naval battles, territory changing hands every few years. Pirates were players who looked at the guild system and said, "Why join when I can just steal?" They'd raid Spanish treasure fleets carrying gold back to Europe, sell the loot to English or Dutch merchants, and hide in unclaimed Caribbean islands where no government could reach them. Some pirates were state-sponsored. England gave certain captains privateer licenses, official permission to attack Spanish ships and take a cut of the profits, government-sanctioned griefing. The Spanish sailed in armed convoys to protection, but pirates just adapted their tactics. One captured treasure ship could set you up for life. European colonies needed massive workforces for plantations and mines. Indigenous populations had collapsed from disease. European colonists needed labor. Their solution was the Atlantic slave trade. Between the 1500s and 1800s, roughly 12 million people were forcibly taken from Africa and transported to the Americas. The conditions were horrific. People packed into ship holds, 15% mortality during voyages, and survivors faced lifetimes of brutal forced labor. This wasn't a side feature. This became the economic foundation. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton production were built on enslaved labor. The profits funded European growth for centuries. By the 1700s, the map had been redrawn. European powers controlled most of the Americas. Indigenous populations had declined roughly 90%. The slave trade had created a forced diaspora of millions. European economies had been transformed by colonial wealth. Spain never recovered from their inflation crisis. Despite centuries of precious metal extraction, they ended up one of the poorer European powers because they never built sustainable industries. They just kept waiting for more loot drops. England emerged dominant by the 1700s. Their long-term resource extraction strategy beat Spain's smash-and-grab approach. They controlled large parts of North America, the Caribbean, and were expanding into India. The Netherlands became the premier trading power, despite having fewer colonies, proving that controlling commerce beat controlling territory. The age of exploration was what happens when you launch a massive expansion with broken mechanics and zero moderation. European powers exploited technological advantages, disease immunities, and political fractures to conquer territory and extract resources. Millions of indigenous people died. Entire civilizations were destroyed. Millions of Africans were enslaved. The European powers who, 1, established colonial systems that caused conflicts for the next 400 years. The update permanently changed the game for everyone, mostly for the worse. And, unlike an MMO, there was no reset button.